On behalf of the school board, I want to reiterate our strong support for our transgender students and staff in light of the draft model policy for Virginia schools released last Friday. We issued a statement supporting our transgender students on Monday, and we will continue to act in the best interest of our students and staff. This proposal does not reflect our values here at Arlington Public Schools and would change how transgender, non-binary, and gender-fluid students and staff are treated in our schools. These proposed policies would roll back crucial protections APS and other school divisions have recently put in place to ensure our LGBTQIA+ students and staff feel safe, valued, and welcome at school. APS will continue to adhere to our non-discrimination policy adopted in June 2017 and updated in 2019 to include transgender students and establish policy implementation procedures for schools to follow in supporting transgender students. We will abide by current federal and state law to ensure all students are treated with dignity and respect while having equal access to a quality education. To learn and grow, students must first feel safe, connected, and supported at school, free to express themselves. This is fundamental to education. I encourage our community to make your voices heard by participating in the 30-day public comment period for this draft, which starts on Monday, September 26th. You can visit townhall.virginia.gov, that's townhall, all one word, .virginia.gov, to view the open comment forums and provide your feedback when it opens on Monday. We will continue to engage with students, staff, and the community on this issue. This is a time to stand together and speak out.
Got any room up there for me, Charlie? Give us a hand, Charlie.
Major, what are you doing here?
Individuals with their personal expressions. I'd like to turn to our superintendent, Dr. Duran, for comment.
According to a memorial article that had appeared in People magazine back in June, the onslaught continued for hours. By the time the gunman was killed after 5 a.m., he had killed 49 people and injured another 58. It was the worst mass shooting in U.S. history until the 2017 Las Vegas shooting. It remains the deadliest attack against LGBTQ plus people in U.S. history. And 6 years later, victims, families, and survivors are still grappling with their trauma and finding ways to heal. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and just 3 decades ago, as the former operations officer for all U.S. Army Strategic Counterintelligence in the continental United States, or CONUS, a named person of interest, like Omar Mateen, the shooter involved at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, may have briefly popped up on my radar as an individual with a possible military service connection who, with his license plate, had tried to make others believe that he had served in the U.S. Marine Corps, with a possibility of asserting military jurisdiction. But very early reports would be what would be described possibly as unconfirmed intelligence, not validated, which later had failed to validate as fact. An assumption, not a fact, and there is a difference. Similarly, as you may recall from the last video in this series, those enjoying a Latin night theme party at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando had been lured into a false sense of security, a situation that had been abruptly altered by a hail of gunfire, indiscriminate, that lasted for several hours, perpetrated by an individual who had managed to enter that entertainment venue clad in body armor and equipped with a modified .223 caliber 6-hour MCX AR-15 assault rifle, set for automatic or burst fire, and a Glock 17 9mm firearm, leaving a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol in his automobile, parked nearby, who nobody partying, enjoying Latin night happened to notice, until it was too late, altering what had been the status quo, or causing what may be described in science as a revolutionary shift in the paradigm, or simply a paradigmatic shift, attended by violent and sudden evolutionary pressure, which is rarely pleasant or convenient. And at least in the military, just like commissioned military officers will, for officer professional development, participate in what are called staff rides, to perform a terrain walk on historic battlefields like Gettysburg or Sharpsburg, often called Antietam, in the past, to gain a sense of the operating environment, to derive lessons learned that may be applied to future scenarios and situations. Especially valuable for examination of mistakes that had been made by prior commanders under the evolutionary pressure of small arms fire and bursting mortar and artillery rounds, so that a reasonably calculated plan can be developed to incorporate into training for potential future scenarios. Just about every tactical training exercise for all soldiers will have programmed into the training schedule an after-action review, or AAR, to review those actions on the objective, what had been planned, what had not been anticipated, what mistakes had been made, just like in cost accounting, looking at budget, actuals, and variances. It is at least a hope that should the same or similar scenarios or situations be presented to them in the future, they will be able to more quickly be able to come up a steep learning curve to be successful in a real battle engagement where lives are on the line, and avert those mistakes that had been made in training while only engaging in a battlefield simulation where nobody dies. Ooh. In near real-time contemporaneous reporting, according to the July 2021 issue from the Mortality and Morbidity Weekly report, publication produced by the CDC during July 2021, 469 cases of COVID-19 associated with multiple summer events and large public gatherings in a town in Barnstable County, Massachusetts, were identified among Massachusetts residents. Vaccination coverage among eligible Massachusetts residents was 69%. Approximately 346 to 74% of cases occurred in fully vaccinated persons. Those who had completed a 2-dose course of mRNA vaccine, Pfizer BioNTech or Moderna, or had received a single dose of Johnson & Johnson vaccine greater than or equal to 14 days before exposure. According to the CDC, during July 3rd to the 17th, 2021, multiple summer events and large public gatherings were held in a town in Barnstable County, Massachusetts that attracted thousands of tourists from across the United States, and for the most part, white residents in Ithaca who were concerned about returning students to Ithaca College and Cornell University. Another case that we are now working on, the idea of a mass introduction of new people to an area would suggest for a potential new infections and spread to occur. It just seems common sense. And according to the CDC, beginning July 10th The Massachusetts Department of Public Health, MADPH, received reports of an increase in COVID-19 cases among persons who reside in or recently visited Provincetown County, including fully vaccinated persons. Persons with COVID-19 reported attending densely packed indoor and outdoor events at venues that included bars, restaurants, guest houses, and rental homes. On July 3rd, DPH had reported a 14-day average COVID-19 incidence of 0 cases per 100,000. July 3rd, 0 cases per 100,000 persons per day in residence of the town in Barnstable County. But by July 17th, the 14-day average incidence increased to 177 cases per 100,000 persons per day in the residence of the town. And if the thought is that if you are in a pandemic and a whole bunch of new people arrive and violate social distancing, this is what should occur, notwithstanding the potential for breakthrough infections, this may sound perfectly normal. According to CDC, during the July 10th to 26th, 2021, using travel history data from the state COVID-19 surveillance system, MADPH identified a cluster of cases among Massachusetts residents tied to specific locations. Additional cases were identified by local health jurisdictions through case investigation. COVID-19 cases were matched with the state immunization registry. These events had occurred in July 2021. And by that time, the Delta variant had become the predominant strain. The most contagious virus that Dr. Rochelle Walensky, who has now announced that she has been infected, would later say she had ever seen in her 20 years of practice, up there with chickenpox and measles, which are both themselves 90% infectious, validated by secondary attack rate diseases. And at that time, the CDC reported in July 2021, the SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant is highly transmissible, and understanding determinants of transmission, including human behavior and vaccine effectiveness, is critical to development prevention strategies. Multi-pronged prevention strategies are needed, they said at that time, to reduce COVID-19 related morbidity and mortality. That was then, and that was over 1 year into a pandemic declaration. And at that time, they did not find it significant, for whatever reason, that there was a pattern of clustered outbreaks, which is a significant finding, particularly when you're talking about a highly contagious disease. But that was then, and this is now, and we admit that we have learned much more about the virus to gain a better understanding. Dr. Rochelle Walensky has said that they are shaking things up at the CDC. And so now let's use the new knowledge from evolving science as a type of acetate overlay, like we do in tactical intelligence, on this situation map. On October 23rd, 2021, the Cape Cod Times published a story that had to have had the effect of restoring hope to the city of Provincetown, as well as others, just 3 months after the face of America in prevention of infection from the deadly coronavirus, especially the more transmissible Omicron Delta variant of concern, had begun shattering. Writing, a new study said that while visitors in Provincetown likely introduced cases of COVID-19 associated with the summer cluster that infected more than 1,000 people, up from the original 439 that had earlier been identified and reported by the CDC. Local public health efforts helped prevent the outbreak from spreading across the state and the nation. And everyone had a sigh of relief. With this great news, local public health officials could feel assured that their dedicated efforts and communal values had confronted a challenge and that they had triumphed at averting a conceivably far worse outcome. And that report in the Cape Cod Times concluded that the surge of cases following the busy July 4th weekend in the Cape's outermost town was the country's first large outbreak of the Delta variant in a highly vaccinated population. The first outbreak of the Delta variant in a highly vaccinated population. But they had come together as a team, extolling communal responsibility, and had improvised, adapted, and overcome. A success story. And the story of victory over the coronavirus had found a new hero, Dr. Catherine Katie Siddle, the lead researcher and author amongst 80 others, well 79 others, a total of 80, making even headline news in the Boston Globe and hanging their pandemic hopes on the very slim read of what was in fact a mere preprint, at least for the present, for a study that had yet to find peer review, even though Dr. Siddle was one of actually the 23 researchers who had contributed to the earlier CDC report published in MMWR's July 2021 issue. And so even today, the researcher who proudly boasts of having obtained her PhD from Institut Pasteur International Network has found the originally non-peer-reviewed preprint study now appear not only on the online ResearchGate platform, where various amateur papers of ranging scientific value can be located online, with at least 57 of her other publications on varied and assorted medical topics, but now also published in peer-reviewed sources including Cell journals as well as Elsevier. According to Dr. Siddle's updated report, it had been determined that the outbreak stemmed primarily from a single source. A single source spreading the virus at multiple locations. And while numerous likely transmissions from and between vaccinated individuals were observed, the downstream impact of the outbreak was minimized with robust intervention and community engagement. A lone shooter, a party animal, who had attended apparently several events and infected up to 1,000 people. This was the clinical conclusion that had prompted the Cape Cod Times to report of the outbreak that almost as quickly as it ballooned, it collapsed. And according to Dr. Siddle, who had participated in the original CDC report, this was the first large, well-characterized outbreak of COVID-19 in a highly vaccinated population in the U.S. and contributed to the CDC's decision to reinstate their indoor mask recommendation for vaccinated individuals. So it also had a policy impact within CDC, with whom she had worked in the original report in July. Explaining her research methods, Dr. Siddle concedes that her team of 80 research scientists did not engage in review of trace contact data to identify a single specific source by identity for the outbreak, but rather had stated we sequenced SARS-CoV-2 genomes in metadata analysis from the residual diagnostic specimens collected between July 9th and August 2nd in the Provincetown area as a part of outbreak-associated and enhanced community surveillance testing, STAR methods, and describing the participants in her study. Dr. Siddle states the individuals providing specimens for sequencing were predominantly male, 80%, with a median age of 43 years, and 84% were vaccinated, broadly consistent with the outbreak as a whole. In her abstract summary, Dr. Siddle explained, to address these questions, we combined viral, genomic, and epidemiological data from 467 individuals from over 1,000, including 40% of outbreak-associated cases. The Delta variant accounted for 99% of cases in this data set. It was introduced from at least 40 sources, but 83% of cases derived from a single source, likely through transmission across multiple settings over a short time rather than a single event over the course of the entire month of July. So Dr. Siddle again concedes that she had not identified a particular individual, but rather had concluded from examining the sequencing of the virus that had infected 467 individuals, primarily men who had attended discrete events involving large social gatherings of predominantly gay men. It appeared that the source of their common infections had been narrowed down to just one particular individual source, like tracing ballistics to a particular gun. One individual who somehow had contact with 460 individual men, and the community, based upon this report, had concluded that it was their dedicated public health measures that had turned the tide and prevented further spread within a month. As a former biological warfare planner, I had contacted Dr. Siddle recently about this report, in which she had stated expressly that we found no evidence of genetic differences of known functional consequence between outbreak-associated and other publicly available Delta genomes, or between outbreak-associated genomes from vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals. A similar finding that had been reported in the very first imported case of COVID-19 to America, arriving at Seattle-Tacoma Airport in mid-January on a 20-hour flight from Wuhan, but in which the index case, or patient zero, popular term, an Asian male in his mid-30s had failed to infect on the flight on a 25-mile share ride and 4 days ambling around the Great Pacific Northwest, had failed to infect any one of a total of 68 trace contacts, which does not sound like a highly contagious disease, but whose genome sequence for his virus had been identified in at least 39 other discrete cases later throughout the entire state of Washington, which would be consistent with a biological agent from the same batch being tactically deployed, and more likely than not tied to a particular individual as much as a deployment team. According to Dr. Siddle, who had participated in preparing the original CDC report, the Provincetown outbreak raised public health concerns and attracted international attention, primarily due to the prevalence of symptomatic breakthrough infections and the potential occurrence of transmission from vaccinated individuals. So, she concedes this was a high-priority public relations problem for the CDC during the dominance of the Delta variant and distribution of the COVID-19 countermeasures products, often described as vaccines, which would be later approved on the basis of a mere preprint of an efficacy study by the FDA for private label marketing on August 23rd, 2021, just 1 month later. But what was of concern to me particularly was Dr. Siddle's concluding remarks that the Provincetown outbreak did not contribute substantially to increase in Delta cases in Massachusetts or elsewhere in the U.S., a clinically significant finding that there was no wider community spread, which would not be the typical pattern of a highly contagious disease where you have exponential transmission patterns, which would make the actual original location very difficult because it would be like someone that was radioactive, but rather one of a biological agent of terror being deployed at a particular location, a similar pattern that we had observed occurring at Cornell University, and that have been noted in other studies. And at Cornell University, a concern has now been turned into one of the first cases raised in an accusatory document in the New York State courts. Rather, Dr. Siddle, a participant in the original CDC study, had granted credit to the high rates of vaccination, which the report conceded had involved multiple breakthrough infections and also the swift public health response, citing to the original CDC study in which he had been a participating researcher. Dr. Siddle, based upon only examination of sequencing data, extrapolates with no credible basis to give credit to deployment of mobile testing, a local indoor masking mandate, and masking mandate that actually CDC over a decade ago had determined would not be effective in a respiratory tract infection pandemic. An extensive outreach program likely contributed to the short duration and restricted impact of the outbreak. Additionally, she says, the active engagement of the affected community in the epidemiological response, possibly influenced by historical public health outreach in the gay community, may have helped mitigate the impact of the outbreak. However, when we reached out to Dr. Siddle regarding these inconsistencies in her conclusions and findings, she elected a dubious right to remain silent. This briefing is unclassified.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. I certainly want to echo your comments, but I specifically want to speak to our students and to our staff and let you know that I want to reassure you, as Mr. Goldstein said, our policies remain in effect, will remain in effect, and we will continue to make sure in APS that we do all that is necessary to protect our students and our staff. So students, if you are feeling unsafe, unwelcome in any way, please speak to a trusted adult at your school, your counselor, your principal, and let them know. Because we will, and I want to tell all of our APS community, all of our staff, our parents, we are going to continue to follow that and make sure our students are safe. And to staff, I've heard questions and concerns about what should I do, how do I respond? You continue to do what we've been doing. Yes, you continue to stand up for our students. You continue to follow that policy. And you make sure that we are proud of what we've been for many years, a safe place for all of our students. We will not let this get in the way and distract us of continuing to stay focused on why we're all here. For students to learn, to become successful, and to create the future for yourself. That's what we're about, creating a future for our students. We are not going to let this get in the way of that. And again, I want to encourage everyone, as Mr. Goldstein said, to provide public comments related to the policy, but the model policy, let the governor and the state know it's important to engage in that. But let us all remain focused and do all that we can in our schools, in our community, to protect all of our students, but certainly our transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid students. Tonight we're speaking specifically about that. Please, we all have a part in making APS, from parents, to staff, to community members. We can and we must continue to make this a safe place. And if anyone in our schools does not provide that safe space.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
I assure you that we will take care of ensuring that changes and that students feel safe and can learn in APS. Thank you.
I went to night school, professor, a very special night school, and they taught us all about coronaviruses.